thought he was like Arizona.
All right, good morning, everyone. I call this meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee to order today, Thursday, October 5th at 9:02 a.m. I am co-chair George Martinez. We'll start off with introductions from our assembly members, and then we'll go right into our order of business. So, passing it on.
Kevin Cross. Scott Myers.
Karen Braga.
Are there any members on the phone? We'll expect other members to join us. Got messages from Mr. Johnson, who is excused today, as well as Chair Constant, who is preparing for our next work session at 11 a.m. at City Hall today. And we are now also joined by Member Brawley. Thank you for joining us. And we'll move right into our first order of business, unfinished business. And today we will have a presentation on 3 and 4-plex expansion. We've been waiting for this wonderful presentation to come. I'm excited for it, and I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Mr. Cross.
Excellent, thank you. I think we have a presentation. I didn't read the notes, so I'm just going to shoot from the hip on this. But I've got some good information here. So as I stare into the spotlight, thank you so much. Now, most of you are very familiar with this because I see a lot of faces who worked with us over the last 6 or 7 months in order to develop what is AO 2023-103, and basically an ordinance making triplexes and fourplexes easier to develop. So why did we focus on triplexes and fourplexes? There's a couple reasons in that. One is, just for information purposes, how the rest of the world views anything up to a fourplex. If you're outside of the building industry, you will recognize that actually, in banking industry, residential properties are up to 4 units. Those can be purchased with VA loans, FHA loans, or a 5% down conventional loan. I pulled some recent stats from the Anchorage MLS, and just to give you guys an idea, in Anchorage in the last year, let me write my little notes here. This is straight from our Anchorage MLS. In Anchorage, within the last year, in the last 12 months, as of this morning, 110 triplexes and fourplexes switched hands in just Anchorage. Okay? Either they hit the market and they were sold, 110. How many of those sold using FHA, VA, or owner-occupied conventional loans? How many of those are owner-occupied, means somebody was looking for a home? Any idea what those percentages might be? 9%. Close. 85%. So triplexes and fourplexes, although we've classified them as investment properties or multifamily and driven them into the commercial department, actually, for the most part, are properties that are being owner-occupied. It is somebody who's moving into it, finding a home, and then renting out a couple other units and providing affordable workforce housing. They typically integrate a higher quality rental unit because you have an occupant or somebody who lives on it within the property who polices things a little bit better than a non-owner occupied investment property, and they fit our neighborhoods a little bit more. So one of the reasons we identified this is because they're small, they're smaller, they can have the same footprint as a residential property. The financing institutions recognize them as residential properties. And so we're solving not only a rental unit, by making them easier to build, not only solving a rental problem, we're solving a housing problem for people who need a place to live, understanding that almost 85% of these are for owner-occupied occupants. So back in the fall of 2022, Sightline Institute did an article saying, hey, can we bring back the triplex? But that was actually on the heels of our housing summit that we had at the LUSAC Library. I see some faces who were there, and we recognized from our Anchorage home builders and also from the real estate industry who said this is a hurdle that we should probably look at. So the questions we started asking ourselves is why, if it was given the same size and footprint, would a triplex be so much more difficult to build than a duplex, right? Given the same footprint, the same lot, the same zoning that allows for it. So as we went through this, we identified a couple different things here. Let me just check my notes here. It took us over 6 months. First thing is we did the process. We recognized it was not going to be efficient just to call it residential. We decided because you have single family and duplex, and throughout code it was important to make those distinguishes single family and duplex from small multifamily. So we created a new category, small multifamily, which just covers triplex and fourplex. This allows us to recognize them that they're multifamily, but also they're not quite residential in the terms that we've historically known it locally here, which is a single-family duplex. But also, they're not commercial, right? And we didn't want to drive them into requiring commercial design standards. So one was creating a small multifamily category, and this allows, obviously, for more gentle density. So why are these units not being developed? We ran into dimensional standards. And I don't know the slides, so I'm just hoping Allie's back there got me on the right one. Just going through the notes here. But so one, we ran a dimensional. The 3+ units requires larger lots and larger setbacks, even given the same size or the same as a duplex on the same size lot. Residential design standards for the same for 3+ units, oftentimes are the same as large apartment buildings. Okay. Other off-site improvements, as we know, we heard about this from multiple work sessions, was a lot of the off-site improvement requirements. There was multiple examples. The one that comes to mind is that triplex lot in Somerset, close to Campbell Creek. It's a dead-end road. It ends with the creek right there. But because of the design standards, because of DCM and what we've done, if he builds, although you can build up to 3 units, if they try to build anything up to 3 units, they're going to have to bring that entire road, even though it dead ends, and it's just like an extension of a driveway, up to a new design standard. Which, I remember that Triad Engineering and the property owner who came and testified at the when assembly work session said it was adding like $600,000 onto it. But we see these off-site improvements for some of these triplexes and fourplexes, adding significant cost onto it. Building and fire safety code. Now these are important things. You're treating triplex and fourplex, often like a 50-unit apartment building, which doesn't make sense. And drainage requirements. Drainage plans are required by count, which are unit count, but not the impervious surface on the lot, which triggers the highest cost for professional service and infrastructure. Again, looking at it, if we're building a small multifamily, why is it so much more expensive than a single family or duplex that may have the same footprint and, depending on how it's done, actually have the same occupants or density? And the example I give is working with a client who was trying to build. He wanted to build 6 units, 2 triplexes on about an acre lot over off Lake Otis. And although they were just going to be 2-bedroom, 1-bath units, so 6 bedrooms, 3 baths per unit, it was cheaper to build 2 larger duplexes with 4-bedroom units and garages than it was to build 2 smaller triplexes. So it means it was cheaper for him to build bigger buildings that had more people, even though ideally for the lot and trying to use the size, he wanted smaller buildings because he thought it fit the neighborhood better. It doesn't make sense. If density is density, then we should be treating at least these residential properties relatively similar. Yes, sir.
Just for the record, I want to acknowledge that Member Salt joined us at 9:04 a.m. Member Volan joined us at 9:09 a.m. And if you're on the phone, please mute.
Kevin was on time to give this presentation.
What's that?
I said, thank God Kevin was on time to give this
I'm
presentation.
just, thank God I was here so that Allie can hand this to me and say, here's what you're reading. Right, excellent. Okay, so over and over again, we can see how these limitations were being applied differently, not just to single-family homes. And so it was evident that the municipality's regulations favor single-family developments over small multifamily developments. So our proposal aims to shift that so that we can help not create massive density, but build to the appropriate density. I think that's what's really important here. We're not looking to significantly increase density on lots where it shouldn't be. We target this on lots that were zoned for triplexes and fourplexes. Just make it easier and more affordable for somebody to build one where it's already been prescribed. Okay. So Title 21 land use, the 2040 land use plan. Now it's important on working our groups that this project aligned with the 2040 land use plan, which establishes goal number 2, infill and development meets the housing and employment needs of residential and business in Anchorage. And I'm so glad Allie's on the slides. Okay. And so this is important for our bringing things up and getting our gentle density up to par. Okay, so for that we started with brief conversations in AO 2023 about the zones, where it applies, and understanding the scope of the proposed changes. So there's a map that highlights the residential zones where AO 2023-103, can I just call it 103 so I don't have to say that every time, just 103 applies. And those are in orange. So we see all this. These are R2M, R3, R3A, R4, and R4A. These zones already allow for multifamily development. But small multifamily projects aren't common in these zones. Why? Because the cost of them. Okay? That is triplexes and fourplexes. All right, so the goal number 3 of the 2040 plan envisioned thriving, walkable, mixed-use commercial centers with neighborhood context for housing affordability and a range of incomes. In viewing the 2040 land use plan, it was clear that the intent to develop more housing centered on commercial areas. So our proposal adds a small multifamily to selected commercial zones highlighted in red. And that would be B1A, B1B, B3, RO, and MC. Now, this is a combined map with the red and oranges that dictated on the map where where 103 applies, significantly medium to high density zones and commercial uses. And I think, again, it's really important to realize that when we're talking about making it easier to build triplexes and fourplexes, again, who is the primary purchaser of these properties? Homeowners, owner occupants. That is the kind of gentle density that Anchorage has been screaming for. That is neighborhoods with people and neighbors who know each other because they live there. Okay? The fear they have is they fear what we've seen before, which is just these rectangles that are shoved together in some of our older developments that were done in the 60s and early 70s, right? And so that was the fear, and that they would just become these wastelands of abandoned vehicles and absent landlords. Okay? But we believe that 103 gets the multifamily workforce housing that we need, but at the same time creating communities and not just giant industrial complexes of housing, right? And so great. So now with this combined map, we show the orange areas red. Let's see what we got here. It says you have an animation. What's the animation?
Yes. Okay, so this is very exciting. I worked hard on this. Pick a spot on the map. Red, orange, whatever, right? And just kind of center your eyeballs on that spot. And watch as we overlay the 2040 land use map. I'm going to do that again.
Ooh,
right?
Wow.
There's a lot. Well, there was a specific desire to make sure that the zones that are impacted are the zones that are reflected in the 2040 land use map. So what we're trying to see here by picking a spot on the map is that whatever that spot is shown in orange as either compact mixed residential or compact,
the compact residential low is the medium orange to dark orange.
And then in pink and purple, you'll see those town centers, city centers, right? And so this is very much reflective. This is a targeted revision to Title 21 to specifically the areas that the land use plan seeks to infuse with some gentle density. Not a ton.
And according to this, Allie, I'm supposed to say, isn't that pretty cool?
That's pretty cool.
Yes, I know. It's written right here on page 3.
Script.
It says, so small multifamily is already allowed in these areas. Why aren't there more 3 and 4 unit projects happening nowadays? And there's several factors, but again, it's embedded in our code, in our zoning code. Dimensional standards are in standard requirements for using square footage of a lot, minimum lot sizes, lot coverage setbacks. Each zone sets these dimensional standards with an intent to regulate the use of the zone. So now we're going to walk through the committee. We're going to walk the committee through one example, which will show you why our proposal advocates for change to dimensional standards in each of the residential. Okay, so we have a case study that you made for us. Thank you, Allie. For example, let's look at an R2M. This is the definition of R2M in Title 21 with our proposed revisions underlined, right? R2M district is intended primarily for residential areas that allow for a variety of single-family, two-family, small multifamily, and multifamily dwellings. So you'll see we added the small multifamily, right? So now we've carved out triplexes and fourplexes with gross densities between 5 and 15 dwellings per acre. R2M district provides residential neighborhoods with a greater diversity of housing by allowing a mix of both detached and a variety of attached dwelling types in close proximity to each other rather than separated into different zoning districts. The R2M district is to be located in established or redeveloping residential neighborhoods, or is to create a transition between single family, two family, small multifamily, and higher density multifamily for mixed use areas. The design of the new development, such as the building scale and setbacks, parking facility size, and location in yard landscaping should be complementary to the existing neighborhood and a mix of dwelling units. So again, this allows for a multifamily property that leans more towards a residential appeal. And I believe you have some photos, or is that coming up on the next one?
Actually, before we do that, can I
Yeah.
break in really quick?
Absolutely, anytime,
So,
Daniel.
R2M, I think is so interesting because it's the only zone that I'm aware of that crosses two different land designations. It's the compact mixed residential low and the compact mixed residential medium. And so it really is supposed to be that buffer between intensities and kind of that growth, that shift up. And so this intention here, Ali, I think is that from Title 21?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to briefly read through the 2040 land use plan about the types of housing that it envisions in R2M, both in compact mixed residential low and compact mixed residential medium. So single family detached homes, accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, single family, two family, other kinds of compact housing, townhomes and smaller apartment structures, a neighborhood-wide mix of housing types, unit sizes, household incomes. And then under medium, townhouses, garden apartments, other forms of low-rise apartments, single-family and two-family residences. New single-family development is encouraged to be compact. Accessory dwelling units, a neighborhood-wide mix of housing types, unit sizes, and household incomes. So the question is, that's what the plan envisions. When we actually get to our dimensional standards, are we able to achieve that type of housing diversity?
Thank you, Dan. So here we have two 6,000 square foot lots. On the left, we have a duplex, and on the right, we have a fourplex that takes the same footprint as the duplex. But the fourplex isn't currently allowed in R2M. Currently, the dimensional standards require the minimum lot size to be 8,500 square feet for 3 units, plus 2,300 square feet for every additional unit. That means that a fourplex with the same footprint as a duplex neighbor would need to be a 10,800 square foot lot. Okay? Only 985 out of almost 9,000, or 12% of R2M lots currently meet the 10,800 square foot threshold for more units. Right? And this is very interesting because we kept having these conversations, which was, and you see this happening, that builders were building very large duplexes, right? But typically on multifamily, I will tell you from the industry standard, I can see where, because that's more like a single family house, they want those large ones, but when you start talking triplexes and fourplexes, actually the sweet spot is small properties. We have a shortage of one-bedroom units. One-bedroom units are almost unheard of. Guys, one-bedroom units in Eagle River right now are renting out for $1,800. Crazy. A one-bedroom. I had somebody I was trying to help find a one-bedroom, a decent area town in Anchorage. I couldn't find one under $1,400. That's what I was charging. That's what a lot of landlords were charging for 2 bedrooms just 2 or 3 years ago. Right? And so how do we make this fourplex that might have 4 one-bedroom units, or 2 two-bedrooms and 2 one-bedrooms, as affordable to build as a duplex that might have 2 4-bedroom units? That building technically might house less people, but this one is way cheaper to build, or the process is a lot more streamlined. So again, taking a look at how we use lot size and how that is unintentionally restricted infill for smaller affordable units. All right. We follow the same practice for each subsequent residential zone, so the dimensional standards for small multifamily mirror 2-family standards in each of these residential zones. So making small multifamily fit in with like duplex standards.
Kevin, if I could interject just one thing.
Please and thank you.
So Kevin said earlier that out of almost 9,000 lots zoned currently R2M, less than 1,000 of them, 12% of them, currently meet that 10,800 square foot threshold. And so by lowering the minimum lot size for 3 and 4plexes, small multifamily units in R2M, that change activates 3,700 lots to be eligible for as many as 4 units. Yeah, right.
And lots or existing structures?
Lots.
Yeah, those are these lots that you could put. Now you can put a fourplex on. All right. Just looking over my notes. Okay. Goal 4 of the 2040 land use plan is that Anchorage neighborhoods provide a range of places to live, meeting the housing needs of residents of all income levels, household size, interests, ages, abilities, races, and ethnicities. That's what Dan was over here just speaking to. This proposal aims to align our existing zoning code with the goals of the 2040 land use plan to make infill and redevelopment possible with a gentle nudge towards density where it already makes the most sense. And from a broader view, you'll see through the ordinance that small multifamily is incorporated in most of the scenarios that exempt or qualify single-family and two-family residential projects with more flexibility than what is required of large commercial projects. It's our hope that by shifting the way that we approach small multifamily projects through regulation, there'll be more opportunity and a greater access to abundant, diverse, attainable housing in the decades to come. All right, so this is set for Assembly public hearing scheduled on December 19th. Let's see what else we got here. But AO 103 is just one piece of the puzzle. Is this? Do you have some sort of? I imagine that you had a slide that had a puzzle on it because you're so creative, Allie.
Something along those lines.
All right, so you got a little behind on those slides. Do we have any questions? So I make shadow puppets on the screen.
We'll take a stack, and so we'll start off with middle row.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for bringing this forward. I look forward to hearing how the community responds, but I think this is a great, pretty common sense thing to bring. Anyway, my question is going back to, you mentioned, in addition to residential zones, you mentioned some commercial zones where this would be allowed. Can you remind me what those are? No, there was a list of them, like B1A.
Yeah, it's here. Hey, Allie, these notes that you presented, are these available for everybody else? Or is this
Okay.
just, we should forward you our notes?
Okay. So basically,
She was asking about the slide that had the B zones.
Yeah, it's up here, Kevin.
yeah, we got it.
B1A, there you go.
Yeah, so I just want to point out, I mean, B1A is kind of, as I understand it, A and B are smaller, and then B3 is really most of our commercial areas, most of the red up there. RO, I think, is residential office. But I wanted to call out, because I think it's worth noting, and this came up last week when we were talking about industrial zones and what's allowed there. Typically, the type of zoning we have, Euclidean zoning, has uses, and then it goes from the most restrictive, so it says you can only do a few things in residential, you can only have residential, and then when you get broader, you can do residential and commercial in commercial zones, and then industrial, and it goes out from there. So it's not mutually exclusive chunks of uses, it's really layering on. And so in our code, though, it looks like, generally speaking, we do make it actually more restrictive than that zoning typically is, where we don't allow, and maybe I'm wrong, but we don't allow, for example, residential building in industrial areas. And so it's just an interesting, we've actually gone way more restrictive than the original policy. And I may be not correct on every single zone, but I just wanted to point that out. So I appreciate that you're putting or allowing residential in commercial zones, because I think we need to start questioning how much we need to segregate those uses, as in addition to figuring out the cost of building piece. So thank you for that.
No problem. It's also important to note that CEB3, well, most of our multifamily out in District 2, Eagle River, is B3. Typically, if a builder is looking for, and that's just because there's so much of it out there, if they're looking to do multifamily, it's easy to search for B3 because it qualifies. The problem you run into is not necessarily, Eagle River has its own challenges. Less so much on design standard, and really a large cost of construction out there is just the lack of public utilities have been extended. We'll probably address that at some later point, but thank you.
Member Brown?
So I'm just a little confused. So the red is the commercial zones, right? Or
Multifamily.
is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so we know along the Muldoon corridor, especially as you get lower, there's lots, it's pretty commercial all along there. So I'm surprised that there's not more red going down that corridor. It's just like a little long.
For the record, I think the map is not showing the northern part of Muldoon,
Oh, gotcha.
which is the city town, the
Okay.
town
Kind of
center.
the curve just above and up.
Well, and also understand
the northern
we're-
part of Muldoon is cut off.
Thanks for
So
pointing that out. You're right.
I was tracking that too.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're just looking at the small multifamily and commercial zones.
Yeah, and then just for the map's sake, for clarification, this is online, so the presentation is online, so any member can have access to it and the public as well. And no, you can tell that where if you're just tracking where Northern Lights is and where the bar is, you could recognize that the northeastmost of the Muldoon corridor is not on the map. So yeah. But it is exactly in that classification. And the other slide that you showed had the overlay with the 2040 land use plan. It definitely showed that corridor as one of the areas of the potential gentle infill, as was described.
And in my personal conversations with the industry, talking to other realtors, getting their ideas and feel on this, I know at least 3 people who, and owners who have R2M lots that are, whether it's in the Spenard area or on Midtown area, like Dowling area, things like that, where there's a lot of R3, close to Taku Elementary, stuff that's tucked away back in there, that we're looking to develop those lots but haven't in years because the cost of doing any kind of multifamily on them, I mean, maybe they do a duplex, but even the market, just the cost of construction, but you know, talking them through this and what this means, it has reinvigorated their effort. If this passes, I know 3 different investors who are eagerly looking forward to building triplexes and fourplexes on those lots, because now you can do so. To where before they were just the cost of construction that really limited them to duplex, and it was just going to be frustrating. And so they've been just sitting on these vacant lots, undeveloped.
I'm going to put myself into the queue, and then we'll come back around to a member of our public as well. You talked about, and I love that you got to the size of the units, and the idea that at some point in the past, the framework was big units, and so there was even somehow the projection of the aspiration of the future homeowner will want to inherit or go toward big units. And we see that the smaller unit, even the single bedroom unit, those are really underrepresented in our market space. And slide 5, if you can bring us back to that slide, Alan. I was curious on the size of the units in each one of these footprints.
I can tell you the
Yes,
one
sir.
on the left.
Okay.
That is my home. So yeah, that's my duplex in South Addition. It's 1,600 square feet. I have a nice, big front yard, a big backyard. On the alley, I have a 2-car garage and a parking spot. So I live up top with Juniper, my dog. Downstairs, for the past 2 years, I had 2 long-term tenants, one of whom was a planner at a local firm, and the other one was a speech therapist. They were with me for 2 years, then they moved out, and then just recently I had signed a year lease. Married couple, he's going to be clerking for one of our judges, and she graduated from Columbia with her degree in international policy. So they'll be with me for at least a year. So all that to say, I would say it's a modest duplex, each unit about 800 square feet, no dishwasher, but we got a nice fire pit, a barbecue out back, and because I own or occupy my duplex, 3 young professionals get to live close to downtown, close to our jobs, close to amenities that millennials love, like the Coastal Trail, Usagaya City Market, Fire Island Bakery. So for me, that's why I'm passionate, because it's been my experience that being an owner occupant of small multifamily, it has just been very positive. It makes my home ownership more affordable, and it makes hopefully it creates a place for long-term tenants to be able to live and contribute to part of our community.
So Kevin, just to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, go ahead. Just to follow up on that. So what are we projecting would be the footprint of the building and the unit size in a potential threeplex? Or
Well, it
triplex?
depends on the developer, and also depends on the size of the lot.
In this particular scenario where they're
So-
comparable.
How big would the units be?
Yeah.
I would probably say that they're going to make an average for a triplex about 900 square feet. That'd be big enough for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit. So the money right now for where I see this, just looking at private investors and where this is, The sweet spot is 1 and 2 bedroom units. However, the cost of construction on multifamily triplex and fourplexes, it doesn't pencil if you build 1 and 2 bedroom units. Because of the additional costs of some of our land use, right? So in order to make up for that, they sell bigger properties. They make 4 bedroom units. The problem is that when it comes from an investment standpoint, that's actually not the most profitable. Like, if you could build it the same cost as residential, the money is 1 bedroom and 2 bath. 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. I'd say why? Because it's a lot of professionals. They're smaller families. We know that. We know that people don't need as many 3 and 4 bedroom units anymore, right? So the rental is 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. 2. What is it about 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom units that you don't run into when you start having 3 and 4 bedroom units? What do you eliminate? That, and you eliminate families with lots of kids, and that's wear and tear. People bring a lot of animals. Smaller units, not only is there a huge demand for them, it's a lower water bill because you don't have 4 and 5 people taking a shower a day, so your metered water bills are less, your wear and tear, your maintenance is less, your parking is smaller on the property. But as a builder, you may want to build a smaller property that services a real heavy need in our demographic, but the cost of it doesn't make any sense. So they're not a non-for-profit business. They build a larger property with a larger footprint, even though it's less units. And they try to make up for it that way because the cost of construction is less, the burden is less, and it's easier to build, and there's more land available because, as we talked about on the R2M lots, we had less than 12% that you were able to do triplex and fourplex. So from the conversations with builders, it also creates a huge opportunity to start building infill and creating these smaller units that we desperately need.
Yeah, and I guess 2 other truths is that, number one, it's the demographic shift that we're seeing, right? If you remember Nolan Clouda's presentation at our housing retreat, he talked about we're seeing an overall decline in population, but we're seeing an increase in smaller households. So that is a need that people have. And then the other truth is that, you could double the size of my duplex and make it a single family home, and that would be okay. And potentially you could have 6, 7 people living in it, and that would be okay. But you couldn't double the size of my duplex and make it a fourplex. So again, are we talking about bulk and height, right, in context of the neighborhood, or are we talking about number of dwelling units? And number of dwelling units doesn't necessarily mean more people. And there's in the 2040 land use plan, there's under goal 7, there's this sentence that I love that talks about how, and I'm just paraphrasing, but increasingly it's the bulk and height that is concerning to residents rather than the number of dwelling units. And I think that is like the balance that we need to strike is how can we get more people housed in terms of units, more families housed, but also in a way that is that gentle density model that is not overwhelming to established neighborhoods.
We had Mr. Schutte. Please identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, Chris Schutte, private citizen consultant. Allie, can you go to the slide that showed the dimensional similarities between single family and fourplex? Any one of them that showed like the lot size and the unit size.
This one is the
Sure,
current.
that one's great. That
Okay.
one's perfect.
Or sorry, this one's.
No, go back one. So thank you. This is kind of a long-winded question, but let me try and summarize it. So I love this graphic. This graphic visually explains the sort of conundrum we find ourselves in very clearly. The approach taken in this ordinance to single out the residential zoning districts that it did does 2 things, though. It doesn't necessarily satisfy this argument. And what I mean by that is the discussion about allowing fourplexes as a small or as a single, treating them the same as single family is really about how do we make creating 4 units in the same size footprint as a single family home permissible. And this slide really shows how you can do that. But then the zoning districts that are being proposed for allowing fourplexes as a single family counters that, because we're essentially saying that it also matters where your property is. And so in essence, we're saying fourplexes will never be allowed south of Tudor. because there's really not any R2M property south of Tudor. All of the hillside is R1, R2A at the most. So the question then is, well, if we want to allow more fourplexes, is there a way to divorce it from the underlying zoning and, like Kevin loves to do, make it just a simple math equation? So we can address community concerns about bulk, height, things like that mathematically. But if you can solve that problem, if your neighbors are okay with a 2,000 square foot single family home or a single family triplex that's 2,000 square feet, what does it matter what the zoning is?
Can I? So
we're gonna have Mr. Bowman will respond.
yeah, I would love that. So I love what you're saying, and I think that looking at bulk and height rather than density of units is a place that we need to go in the future. The reality is that we have adopted plans, the comp plan, the 2040 land use plan, and there are land use designations and zoning districts that do not call for more than 2 family. In other legislation, I'm trying to make the argument that you should be able to have a duplex by right anywhere in the acreage pool. And so that'll be a philosophical debate that folks will have based on the interpretation of the 2040 land use plan. And this is a joke, but one of my things that I like to say about the 2040 land use plan is kind of like interpreting the Bible. You can come away with very different theologies. But I think it's pretty clear that we chose those residential zones based off of what the 2040 land use plan calls for. We can amend the 2040 land use plan. There's Ryan, I see you back there.
Okay.
No, it's interesting because I agree with you. Yet you only bite off as much as you can chew and swallow, as much as you would like to take larger bites. It's interesting because I talked about this at our last CDC meeting, in that we put these restrictions into place, but the housing problems got so bad that the market is dictating. I can't tell you how many houses are now being purchased by multiple families because they need a place, and it's basically living like a duplex. I talked about the story just last week. At the last CDC meeting, a house I just sold, a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2-car garage house. It's 2,200 square feet, over off Patterson. Backs up to the little park back in there. That was sold by a married couple whose children had moved out, older children, didn't need a house so big, wanted to downsize, couldn't find small, reasonable housing, were open to a duplex, but wasn't available because they just wanted a small unit. They didn't want a big place. So they moved out to the valley and found a property. Guess who moved into their house? A brother and sister who both are married and have kids, and they just basically turned it into a duplex. And now the neighbors are like, oh, look at this house. I'm sure the neighbors are like, what happened? Because now this property has 6 cars in front of it. Okay? And so we got in our own way. We didn't allow for other development, whether they wanted a duplex or whether they wanted a triplex, depending on what the family looks like, but it's happening. Also, where I live back in Eagle River, I think it's funny because we have very strict land use that says, hey, listen, single family duplex, no triplexes, but I can't tell you how many of these people up there, when their kids move out, convert the basement to a rental unit and then rents out the apartment above a shop. And I'm like, you're living in basically, you're treating it like a triplex, but you're saying you don't want triplex development in your neighborhood, and yet you're renting your house out like a triplex. So I don't know how you overcome some of those barriers, but at least this gets us our infill and density where it was intended.
Yeah, just identify for the record.
Francis McLaughlin in planning. I just have 3 quick questions and a comment. Just a comment on this slide. So I receive calls from concerned members of the public. I'm in the planning department. I don't work on drainage issues per se, but I do get calls with people complaining that the single family home being built next to them is causing a drainage problem onto their lot and is flooding out their property. I put myself in that neighbor's shoes, and that would be really worrying if the development of a single family home, drainage not being accounted for, floods out my lot because it ruins my property. And with this slide here, if you look at this and if it's built this way, I think the difference between the duplex and the fourplex is that you may see more vehicles, you'll undoubtedly see more vehicles, and that there will be more impermeable space, so more paving, and so drainage would be a larger concern. Well, the size of the building appears to be the same, that if drainage not being, accounted for with the development of that fourplex, the difference between those two, all things being equal, is that there'll be a greater drainage problem, generally. So that's just it's a trade-off. I think that this ordinance is probably trying to put a value on more units, but I just want to point out the potential of drainage. And I'm not a drainage person, that would be for the other experts in the room. So Ms. Branga's question about that map, it looked like the map went as far north as East 6th Avenue. And that's right, most of the commercial starts after East 6th Avenue, but that's how far north that map looked to go. Two questions for Mr. Volin. One, with this ordinance, how would it affect Chugach Eagle River? And then the question earlier was about your house, your duplex versus the triplex. What were the size of the units in the triplex, if you know? You may not have that information, but because you said the duplex was 800 square feet.
So I think the triplex, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that was part of that design competition that they did. Was it Seahawk that did that?
Cooking Housing is Metropolitan Corners
Yeah.
in the back.
Yeah. So we can get you that. Tyler Robbins.
No, it's not anything. I just as you dial into the
Yes, I'd like
presentation or
to
something.
know.
Yeah, we can find that out. And then Tyler and Devin were in our working group. And then maybe Kevin could speak to the question about how this impacts Eagle River.
Well, it's going to be a little bit different. So we're outside, and maybe that'd be a great question for the building department, because I've kind of had some questions about how that kind of affects. But the stagnation in Chugach Eagle River for multifamily is less land use and it's more public utilities. There's a lot of undeveloped B3 land out there, which is our primary zoning for multifamily. But they just haven't expanded the utilities. I mean, the 2006 comprehensive land use plan said to extend public utilities up Old Glen to North Birchwood Loop, and it's never been done. And that was originally established in 1998 and then updated in 2006, and they said still expand. There's a ton of B3 land that could be developed for multifamily. And so my concern as far as Chugach Eagle River is that there's a couple spots that might benefit from the design standard in the business district. There's some R2M and some other lots but those have already been slated by developers for, and there's some B3 in there. They're putting garage towns. They're like a garage town. They're doing someone's proposing a 24-unit development. We don't see a ton of triplexes and fourplexes. Primarily, again, it has to do with the lack of public utilities and where they are, because most of what's been built is built out there. And the cost of a well and septic with the new DEC requirements, 200 feet between if you're doing a fourplex, it's going to be 200 feet, I think starting in 2024, between a septic and a well. That's going to blow your lot size way up. The lot size minimum won't have any effect on that if you've got to be 200 feet from your septic to your well. That's easily a 20,000 square foot lot to begin with. So I guess it's kind of interesting because we can say, how does that affect Chugach Eagle River? But the problem with Chugach Eagle River is that with the lack of public utilities, that's their 900-pound gorilla. It's really not land use. We have tons of B3 you could argue do this with.
Mr. Cross, if I could follow up.
Yeah.
So the question was, because this is a zoning ordinance, how would it affect Chugach Eagle River?
It only applies to the acreage goal.
Yeah, so that
We're outside the Building Safety Administration, which I think is pretty much where this maybe departments can
So
correct me.
you're creating
Correct
a
me.
new land use category, and it is this small multifamily for triplexes and fourplexes. And this ordinance would be creating that new category only for Anchorage and not for Chugach Eagle River. It's just.
We're outside the BSA, so you could argue that Chugach Eagle River many times can already build to a lower standard. And that's where, and that's,
We're talking zoning.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
You're talking building safety service area versus land use area. And I think where Francis is going is how does this new small multifamily use category fit into and affect Chugach Eagle River?
Something to chew on.
yeah, I think it has almost negligible effect.
Well,
So-
I don't think our Title 21 portion applies to Eagle River.
That's right, that's
Right.
what she
Yeah.
was saying.
Yeah,
Alex was saying.
Title 10.
So I think it'll be a good, thank you for flagging that, raising the question. In the essence of time, because we do have the next presentation, and there are two people in the queue. Member Brawl?
Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to put on the table two things that I heard that I think are going to continue to be themes. So pulling back from this ordinance, but I think it's going to continue to be hopefully a discussion over the next year. One is I really appreciate the that is in the plan and that you guys talked about, diversity of income, because I think one of the deep-seated assumptions that's built into zoning is segregation of folks by socioeconomic status or income. And then one of the results of that in most cities, including some parts of our city, is concentrated poverty. And so there's been a whole move over the last generation or more to shift thinking from we're putting all the poor people in one area and then everybody else gets to live wherever they want. And so I just want to put that on the table. And I think where this comes in is not because this is going to bring a bunch of low-income folks into every neighborhood, but it's really questioning how much we put into our policies segregation by income. So the fact that we're not building small units and that most places we don't actually feasibly allow small units means people who can't afford a large unit can't live there. Or who want to choose to have a smaller unit. So I want to really just call that out. And I know that, again, that's bigger than this ordinance, but I think that's a conversation we have to keep having, is how much that's baked into our zoning code. And then the other thing is to mention property rights. And so this is something I struggle with as a planner, is how much do we protect individual property rights? Because the purpose of zoning is to basically take some of those individual property rights, recognizing that what you do on your property affects other people. But at the same time, how much does our zoning code take away property rights because we are protecting the rights of our neighbors? And so I think that is going to continue to be a balance. And there are valid issues like drainage, like parking in front of other people's houses, things like that. But I think also we need to call out the assumptions that are built into that, and then think about how much we're taking property rights for the sake of others, what we say as the neighbors. Because I personally think we've gone too far in the other direction. Away from allowing people to do more with their property. So I just wanted to put those on the table as things to think about as we continue to talk about this and other ordinances.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Robbins? So I think my question is a clarification. Mike Robbins, ACDA. So if you could just go back to what you talked about, I think something like this is a really good idea, so I'm leaning more in the supportive category, but you talked about that right now there's about 8,000 lots that are available for this type of building. Is that what you said?
Ally, do you want to get those numbers from?
Yes.
Without the change, you said there was about 8,000 and then.
So there are in R2M, so this ordinance applies to 5 residential zones. And so for the purposes of this conversation, looking specifically at R2M as the kind of case study piece, there are just under 9,000 lots in R2M.
Okay.
8,900.
And so may I just stop for a second? So could you currently build a fourplex or a triplex on that lot today?
No.
Okay.
Only 985 of that 8,900, that's only 12%, currently meet the current requirements for the minimum lot size for a fourplex.
Okay, so if you make the ordinance change, that number is going to go to.
It adds 3,700.
You would activate 3,000 plus lots.
So out of curiosity, maybe the building department can tell us how many triplex permits or fourplex permits were issued in Anchorage in the last 5 years for this type of construction?
And if you don't want to answer off the top of your head, we can get it. We can get it to us.
Be exact, but was it 100 or was it 1,000 or what was it, a big number like 10 or just trying to get a perspective on, are we addressing the right problem? I mean, I agree that it's great to have land, greater use of our land, but if builders aren't already building these on the land that is available, why would creating more land all of a sudden make them build more?
So I think
So that's my question.
Yeah, we're gonna just close out with a great question. It's a good question that we'd love to know kind of the scope of the amount of fourplexes and triplexes over 5 years. I think that's a great question that we can get a response back to. I think this is a great starting point. So anytime there's we have a small amount of time, but anytime there's something around housing that sparks a lot of interest and a lot of conversation, I think it's a good thing. I would encourage follow-ups. I know if we had 5 agenda items, that would have been a lot shorter, a lot sooner. So we're going to just shorten that down and transition into our next conversation. I thank you all for the work. Thank the sponsors for this particular thing. And I would just offer one particular piece to say, please explain, not now, but in the bigger picture, how this is compatible with the home initiative. that would be really helpful to see the big picture.
So this isn't an official number, but according to the multiple listing service, since 2017, and I just did triplexes and fourplexes, built and sold, since with 2007, there's only been 17.
How many?
17.
17.
Since 2017. That's according to NLS. Those would be new construction. They listed them, they put them on, and they inputted those stats for sales. Now, not everything goes through the MLS, so it's probably a little bit more than that. But since 2017, there's been 17 new construction recorded sales for both triplexes and fourplexes in all of Anchorage. That would include Eagle River to Girdwood.
And then the question is why? And that's what this ordinance tries to do.
Right, and my question stems from, if I may, I'm sorry.
No, actually, no.
That's okay, let's move
I
on,
would
Chair.
appreciate us
Let's go.
continue to move forward. I think there are lots of great conversations to have, and I love that people want to get into the weeds. So get in there and work it out. Because I would also throw on top of that, if you look at the vacant and abandoned property list, we probably have more than that number on that list as well in terms of tries and fours. So lots of opportunities to explore. But this is another really important topic that our committee is addressing, and we have a presentation from Member Braun.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And this will be relatively brief, and I'll just preface to say this does deal with alcohol tax administration, so not what we spend the money on, but how we collect the money and from who. And then normally I would think discussions about taxes often would happen in the Budget and Finance Committee, but because this deals basically with business licensing, or in this case, nonprofit organizations that aren't for-profit businesses, that's why I felt like it was appropriate to bring here. So if you can go to the next slide, Mandy. This is a very brief presentation. I just wanted to remind folks where this fits into the big picture. So we have worked through the various topics that the alcohol laws at the state level touch, and the next one we're looking at taxation. So coming to the end of things that we think need to be updated or changed to be compliant for the new laws coming online in January. Next slide. So for this one, again, just showing, we've talked about these three on the left. The penalties one, I'm not going to bring to a committee because I think it's really just cleanup, but you'll see that soon. So let's talk about alcohol tax administration. Next slide. So this one, I actually, I cannot take credit for this ordinance because the staff at Treasury, and I don't see them here, maybe they're online. They were already working on reviewing our code, Chapter 12, Section 65, Alcohol Tax Administration, to see if there's any updates or changes to be made. So there's a draft ordinance that you have that we don't need to walk through page by page, but just to say this is what we're working on. The one that I wanted to bring for this policy discussion is really talking about whether and how we tax nonprofit events. So those are specifically fundraisers, basically. So an event that is not run through a business or a catering permit. Certainly a lot of organizations that run fundraisers will work with a bar and have a catering permit, but you can, as a nonprofit, a non-licensee, run your own events on a limited basis. So we're talking about that. So just to basically say, Treasury recommended this policy change, which is to exempt sales and service at nonprofit special event permits, as well as alcohol beverage auction permits from paying sales tax. And so that's the idea. And so I'm here to get some feedback on that. And if you go to the next slide, I'll go into more detail and then we can talk about it. So I'll just say too, the stuff in the ordinance is really what all the changes in here are basically making that change. So that's why I'm talking about the policy overall. So right now, in order to collect alcohol tax, you need to register with the city. And so for a business that operates year-round, that has a license, that's just part of what they need to do. So if you're not a business, you're not normally registered. Right now we have a process of temporary registration. And so this is actually, one of the reasons this is being brought is it creates administrative burden for permit holders. So if you're a nonprofit, you're trying to get your event together, you've gone through the state, you got your permit together, you may or may not even know that you need to register with the city. And so there's a disconnect there where some organizations are actually paying this tax and doing what they need to do. Other ones, I don't think it's that they're intentionally not doing it, they just don't know they have to. And so, as it mentions up here, they have to register if they anticipate more than $5,000 in sales or $250 in tax to be collected. They have to make a deposit up front. And then again, there's this disconnect where some people are doing this and others aren't. The next one is it creates burden on staff. So, so as the Treasury staff shared with me, like this takes a fair amount of their time. You know, they have to go chase down these events, or if they don't get notified by the state in time, which hasn't been happening recently, they just don't know about it. It takes a fair amount of their time because they're working with folks who really only need this for one purpose. And then specifically they mentioned on our auction permits, it's hard to determine the sales price for tax purposes. So if you're auctioning a bottle of wine, are you going to tax the retail cost? Are you going to tax what it actually auctioned at? How are you collecting that tax from the person who just purchased that auctioned item? There's some logistics specifically with that one as well. And then really the bottom line here is we're not getting a lot of money for this. So what they shared is that for all of that work, for everybody involved, we've gotten about $10,000 since this tax started almost 2 years, or I guess more than 2 years ago now. So really, in terms of what we would be forfeiting in terms of our revenue, I don't want to see us forfeit a bunch of alcohol tax revenue if we're supposed to get it. But in this case, it feels like we're requiring a lot of work for everybody involved and not getting a lot of benefits. So in terms of if we did this, we're not taking $1 million out of the tax. We're taking, I guess, about $5,000, and that's with the people who are paying it. So the last thing to note here, other local governments with this tax, and this is the memo that you have from Treasury, they did some research. I asked them to look at other jurisdictions. Fairbanks and Juneau both have these taxes, and they already exempt these permits. So that's the proposal. And so again, this wouldn't be all events. This would really just be events under this nonprofit event permit that are by non-licensees, not businesses. And then the proposal is also the alcohol auction permits, which I will say some businesses do get those. You can get them as a nonprofit. You can also get them with other types of event permits. So that would technically exempt anybody who's using this, which could be a for-profit, fundraiser for whatever kind of event. And so we could talk about that too. We could narrow that down. But really, bottom line, we're not getting a lot of money for this. So that's the proposal. And I would love to hear questions or discussion.
We have a stack, and Member Saltis first.
So I think you answered my question, but let's take Hilltop, for example. Nonprofit has a permit, just had Oktoberfest, which required a special permit. They would not be, that special permit would not be exempt.
So do they have a license? Okay, so if they already have a license, then they should already be registered with the city. So this would really just be events that.
The one-offs.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I should say too, in that situation, let's say there's a bar that's got a catering permit and they're helping with a nonprofit fundraiser. The bar is already registered. They're equipped to deal with the tax. So that's the difference.
And just to put a fine point on the alignment with the new state regs, this is really bringing the municipal code into alignment with the state updates.
Yeah, I should clarify that. So everything else in the ordinance is really just those changes. And then this one is not dependent on the state changes, but the name of the permit's changing, and so I think it was an opportunity to talk about this. And actually, I forgot to mention one more thing. We haven't worked out effective date on this. So right now it's written effective immediately. I'm working with Treasury on how much time they would need to put this in place. We're almost coming up on holiday season, so it may be feasible to exempt it now, or maybe it's better to let it run through one more season as it is, and then have it effective in, say, February. So that's not represented here, but it would really be what would work for Treasury.
Francis, want to just identify yourself again?
Can you name some of the, Francis McLaughlin, Planning Department, can you just name some of the nonprofits that might be in this category of being affected, like Boys and Girls Club fundraiser, Catholic Social Services Gala, the Opera Association, silent auction, and stuff like that?
That's a good question, and I don't know if Treasury's on the phone because I don't see them here.
We can ask, are there any members of the Treasury Department on the line with us? There are none in person. I don't hear it.
Okay, so I will follow up on that, but essentially if it's someone who doesn't already have a license, that would be.
Yeah, I just kind of like putting out there what the category is, because when we talk about it, it's something, well, what's an example? But it's not something you have to get back to me on.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good thing that we can put in the memo. And Mandy, I don't know if you have any sense, I know you don't deal with permits, but.
Actually, like the ones that
Yeah.
Francis was saying, it's
Yeah.
gonna be
Okay.
those, like, it's the weird off ones that don't have a license, aren't getting a catering permit for, they're just doing their own little fundraiser event, so it's gonna be a lot of like the Catholic, I think like
Yeah.
Bloom and Christie usually has stuff like that, their galas, stuff like that, where they do fundraisers.
Okay. Yeah, and the permit that we're talking about, like I said, alcohol auction permits could be held by different types of licensees, but this nonprofit one, you have to be a nonprofit in order to even qualify for that license. So by definition, we're talking about basically fundraisers for those organizations.
Member Bronco?
So if I read this, I probably would get the answer, but maybe you could just tell me. So if it was an auction that there was free alcohol at, I mean, they were auctioning off other things, does that apply to this? Or is it only the auction of alcohol and sale of alcohol?
Yeah, it would be the auction and sale of alcohol. So there's a permit type, right now it's called a wine auction permit, but it's being expanded to allow beer and spirits. But yeah, it would just be, it allows you to auction off alcohol
Got it.
legally, because otherwise you can't sell it without a license or permit.
Thanks.
But yeah, it wouldn't apply to other things that aren't taxed by the alcohol tax.
Great. Are there any other questions for Member Brawl? Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the alignment to the state stuff. I mean, with staff member Mandy Honest and I were having a pre-meeting conversation about just other areas of alignment with the state and the changes of the state has made over the last few years and how we continue to bring up our code into alignment. So appreciate that you're taking on that particular work on this particular issue, and we'll move on from that. Thank you. So we don't have any items for new business, and we do have a meeting at 11. I want to open up right now for, and this is where, Mr. Roberts, if there's any follow-up questions, we may have a chance to have a little wind-down discussion. So I just wanted to make sure we get through. I didn't know how long the presentation from Member Brawley was going to take. But I'd open it up right now for audience participation. Are there any members of the audience here in person who would like to speak? Yes.
Thank you, through the chair. Mike Robbins, ACDA. I just wanted to clarify my question in that I think that sort of diving into which problem we're solving, but I think to understand that if we are solving the right problem by creating more opportunity, you know, changing the zoning creates more opportunity for building, but if building is not happening already, then maybe it's not just about the zoning. And while that's really important, I want to make sure that this conversation we're having about incentives and what's really keeping the builders from building, is it not having the land or is it not having the cost? And so I think it's really important to do both. So I'm glad that you're doing it.
It's a great question, and I think there's two companion ordinances. This is step one, is the Title 21. And step two will be the Title 23. And so I think Kevin touched on this in the presentation, but that's why we really have this robust working group. We've been working for months with the fire inspection, traffic department. We've had local developers at the table with us for nearly all of these meetings. So Andres Canelli, Eric Visser, Cook Inlet Housing Authority. And we wanted to ask them, why are you not building this missing middle? Why have we only had 17 triplexes built? You know, triplexes, fourplexes, I don't know what the number was. But, and so that's what we had to unwind. And then we got into like the nerdy, like design criteria manual, drainage review. And the fact is that they're treated very differently. Triplex and fourplex have to go through all of these extra policies and procedures, permitting processes, in addition to things like the dimensional standards, lot sizes. And so I guess my hope is that if we tackle those things one at a time, we will see an uptick. I'm going to be real though, I don't think we're going to see an overnight change. We're not going to see a proliferation of triplexes and fourplexes throughout the Anchorage Bowl. It'd be great if we did. But this is going to be incremental change. This is going to allow people to do more with their property, to add units, squeeze in a few neighbors here and there.
Thank you. As a member of the audience, we would love to hear from you, Mr. Dave.
Dave Whitfield Planning. I agree wholeheartedly with what Daniel said. I think, you know, to Mike's point or question, zoning is one part of the equation, right? It's one part of the problem that we can solve. The other aspect of this is the companion ordinance that deals with the Title 23 stuff. Triplexes and fourplexes are reviewed under commercial plan review, whereas 1 and 2 family are reviewed under residential. That, and what we've heard from the development community, is a barrier to developing triplexes and fourplexes, so that's part of it. Of course, the cost of materials, labor costs, all of that is going to weigh on whether we see more triplexes and fourplexes being developed. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Daniel, that this will be incremental change. And what this ordinance and the Title 23 ordinance does is it provides opportunity. And so, absolutely, hopefully we see some more development of triplexes and fourplexes in the near future.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any members of the audience on the phone who would like to be heard at this time? Excellent. I don't hear anybody, so we'll just finish this conversation out of any closing comments. But I'd like to just speak to that a little bit as well. Condition setting is something that we are essentially doing, right? And so unraveling conditions is also an important action, right? And so we're unraveling, and we get to see that unraveled by recognizing that there are goals in plans that that are impossible to get to, not only for the practical reasons of cost and the mismatch of aligning requirements and build stuff, but also because of, again, the different expectations that the community had for itself during those times, right, that all need to be revisited. So as every step that we take as a body to move forward, taking down some of those barriers, we also have a real opportunity to inform the public about where we are today and what those expectations we have today and how they need to be met tomorrow with the choices that we make, which may, like you mentioned before, Mr. Boland, lead us to some robust philosophical conversations. But they have to happen, and I think every step helps us create a condition for success. So I appreciate the work, and thank you for the feedback from the folks in our public participation today. Cool. Any members with final comments? Excellent. Well, we're going to reserve some time, and we're going to adjourn early at 10:09. Thank you, everybody.